They built a $2.3 million luxury clubhouse on my land, then had me arrested for trespassing on my own property. When I confronted the HOA president, she stepped out of her white Mercedes, smirked, and laughed in my face.
Prove it's yours, country boy!
Biggest mistake of her life. She had no clue she was facing a retired Army combat engineer who spent 20 years blowing up bigger threats than her suburban kingdom. Olympic pool, tennis courts, marble lobby with crystal chandeliers, all sitting pretty on my family's land. The thud of surveyor stakes into my soil was her first warning. The roar of the bulldozer was her nightmare. What happened next? The HOA crumbled. She begged in court, and I walked away with millions. What's your wildest HOA horror story? Drop it below. This revenge blueprint will show you exactly how to flip the script when they think you're powerless. 3 months before they built that clubhouse, she came hunting. My name's Garrett Westbrook, 52, retired Army combat engineer. I've been living on my family's 47-acre ranch in Millfield County, Texas for 3 years now, ever since I moved back after burying my wife, Sarah. Cancer took her in 8 months. The city felt too loud afterward, too full of ghosts, so I came home to heal. This land's been Westbrook property since 1943 when my great-grandfather homesteaded it after coming back from the Pacific. The original farmhouse sits under live oaks that were here before electricity reached this part of Texas. My workshop, where I build custom furniture now that Uncle Sam doesn't need me blowing things up, still smells like the cedar shavings and motor oil from great-granddad's tools. Honest work in an honest place. At least, it was. The trouble started when Willowbrook Estates sprouted next door like expensive weeds, $800,000 McMansions with perfectly manicured lawns and their own private kingdom of rules. I figured live and let live. Them in their glass boxes, me under my century-old oaks. Big mistake. White Mercedes in my driveway, not a speck of Texas dust on it. Out steps this ice queen in a designer suit that probably costs more than most folks make in a month. Blonde hair sprayed into submission, red manicured nails like claws, perfume so aggressive it made my old dog retreat to the porch. Mr. Westbrook, Vivian Blackthorne, Willowbrook HOA president. We have a problem. I'm standing there in work boots with sawdust in my beard, wondering what problem she's invented. Your property is destroying our investment values. Those vehicles, she pointed at my grandfather's 1967 Chevy and my Afghanistan Jeep. That primitive workshop, this whole backwoods aesthetic. My residents are losing money because of your lifestyle choices. The way she said backwoods made my combat instincts wake up. The crunch of gravel under her designer heels sounded like a threat. Ma'am, this land's been in my family 80 years. Your subdivision's been here too. She smiled like a predator. Which is exactly why I'm offering you a solution. $180,000, cash. You can relocate somewhere more appropriate for your situation. $180,000. For 47 acres of prime Texas real estate worth at least $850, with highway frontage and creek access. This woman thought I fell off the turnip truck yesterday. Not interested. Her mask slipped. The taste of danger filled my mouth, metallic and familiar from too many combat zones. Mr. Westbrook, I'm trying to be neighborly, but property disputes can be so complicated. Boundary surveys, environmental violations, permit compliance. Legal bills add up fast for people on fixed veteran incomes. Crystal clear threat. She'd done her homework, knew I was living on disability and woodworking income. You threatening me, lady? Threatening? Cold laugh. I'm offering opportunity, but if you prefer the difficult path? She shrugged, designer purse swinging. I didn't build a successful legal practice by accepting no from people who don't understand leverage. She dropped her business card in my dust and drove away in a cloud of exhaust and entitlement. That evening, I found surveyor stakes driven into my property. The next morning, men in orange vests were spray painting coordinates along my fence line. When I demanded answers, they mumbled about boundary verification for development. I pulled the original 1943 homestead deed from great-granddad's safe, papers thick as cardboard, legal descriptions clear as gospel. But Vivian had already filed a boundary dispute with the county, claiming confusion about property lines. The surveyors wanted a 30-foot strip of my land, just enough for their walking trail and community amenities. This wasn't confusion. This was theft with paperwork. Sitting on my porch that night, listening to coyotes and subdivision machinery, I realized something important. Vivian Blackthorne had just declared war on a man who'd spent 20 years teaching insurgents what happened when they stole what wasn't theirs. Time to school another enemy. The survey scam hit me like a sucker punch at dawn. I'm drinking coffee on my porch, watching the sun paint the live oaks gold, when 3 trucks roll up with Precision Land Surveying painted in official-looking letters. Professional setup, GPS equipment worth more than most people's trucks, guys in hard hats carrying clipboards thick as Bibles. The crew chief walks up nervous, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Mr. Westbrook, we're here for the boundary verification. County order." "Verification of what?" He hands me documents that feel expensive. Thick paper, embossed seals, the kind of official presentation that makes people stop asking questions. But 20 years ratting intelligence reports taught me that the fancier the paperwork, the bigger the lie usually hiding underneath. Says here there's confusion about property lines from 1960s subdivision maps. We're just clarifying legal boundaries. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with my morning coffee, and something about this whole setup stank worse than week-old fish bait. These weren't county workers. They moved like private contractors getting paid serious money to find specific results. I studied their work order while they unloaded equipment. County letterhead, legal jargon thick enough to choke a politician, coordinates that didn't match anything I'd seen before. But buried in the fine print, something caught my eye. The property description put my fence line 50 feet closer to my house than it actually was. "This is wrong," I said. "Sir, we just follow the work order. Complaints go through the county planning office." They spent 6 hours driving metal stakes into my soil, each one sounding like a funeral bell as it pierced the earth. When they finished, their corrected boundary gave someone a perfect 30-foot corridor right through my land, exactly enough space for a walking trail or maybe something bigger. But here's where military training pays dividends. When someone runs an operation in your territory, you conduct surveillance. I followed their lead truck when they packed up, staying back just far enough to avoid detection. Instead of heading toward the county offices like legitimate surveyors would, that truck drove straight to Willowbrook Estates. I watched through binoculars as the crew chief met Vivian in the clubhouse parking lot. She handed him an envelope that wasn't thin. That night, I pulled out my laptop and started digging, something I learned in Army intelligence. Always verify your enemy's credentials before they verify yours. Precision Land Surveying's business license showed incorporation just 3 months ago. The registered owner made my blood pressure spike, Blackthorne Consulting Services. Vivian had created an entire fake surveying company to manufacture false evidence against me. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office with my original 1943 homestead deed and a growing appreciation for this woman's audacity. Martha Rodriguez, 30 years behind that desk, knows every property scam in 3 counties, studied my documents with the intensity of a crime scene investigator. "Your great-granddad filed this clean in 1943, she said, finger tracing the legal description. "Why the concern?" When I explained about the survey, her expression darkened like storm clouds rolling across Texas prairie. "Nobody from this office authorized any boundary work on your property. Someone's been forging county documents." Martha helped me request an official GPS survey from the State Department. The real coordinates were a beautiful surprise. My property actually extended 30 feet further than I'd thought, right through the middle of where Vivian's fake survey claimed HOA land began. I drove home with legitimate state documents proving every one of those surveyor stakes was trespassing on my property. The taste of incoming victory was sweeter than Martha's courthouse coffee. That afternoon brought pure satisfaction. Me with a post hole digger, a box of no trespassing signs, and the legal right to plant them exactly where they belonged. The sound of metal biting into hard earth echoed across the countryside as I marked my real boundaries. Signs that cut right through Vivian's planned walking trail. By sunset, a dozen bright orange warnings proclaimed the truth. Every inch of her community path sat squarely on Westbrook land. My phone rang within an hour. "Remove those signs immediately." Vivian's voice could freeze hell. "Or I'll have you arrested for harassment." "Ma'am, those signs mark my property lines. I've got state surveys to prove it." Silence stretched like a taut wire. Then, "We'll see about that." The line went dead, but her message came through crystal clear. This war was just getting started. She proved me right the next morning. stapled to my mailbox like a declaration of war, a building permit application. Willowbrook HOA wanted to construct a community wellness center covering the exact area their fake survey had tried to steal. Vivian wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. The phony boundary scam was never about a simple walking trail. She wanted enough of my land to build a whole damn clubhouse. Now I understood the scope of her ambition and the depth of her stupidity. Time to show this suburban general what real warfare looked like. Vivian turned her fake permits into real destruction faster than I could blink. I woke up to the sound of war machines at my doorstep. 18-wheelers rumbling down the county road like a mechanized invasion. Cement trucks, excavators, bulldozers with teeth big enough to swallow cars whole. The backup beepers and diesel roar made my old farmhouse shake on its foundation. By the time I stumbled outside in my boots, they'd already started murdering trees. The whine of chainsaws ripping through century-old oaks hit me like fingernails on a chalkboard. Sawdust filled the air so thick I could taste it, mixing with diesel exhaust that burned my throat and made my eyes water. I marched over to where some supervisor in an orange hard hat was directing this destruction like a symphony conductor from hell. "Get off my goddamn property!" He looked at me like I'd escaped from a mental ward. "Sir, we're building the Willowbrook Wellness Center. County permits, all legal and proper." He waved a folder stuffed with official-looking papers. "Those permits are fraudulent. This is private land." "I'll take it up with City Hall, Pops. I just drive the equipment where they tell me." While I spent the morning on hold with county bureaucrats who'd rather eat glass than do their jobs, these bastards poured a foundation the size of a basketball court right where my wife's rose garden used to bloom. The wet concrete smell mixed with the memory of Sarah's perfume still lingering in that soil made me want to grab the nearest sledgehammer. But 20 years in Army intelligence taught me something valuable. When someone's running a sophisticated operation, follow the money and find the puppet master. I started with Dale Morrison, the building inspector who'd rubber-stamped this disaster. Public records showed he'd been 3 months from foreclosure on his modest house. Medical bills from his wife's cancer surgery, drowning in debt, financial ruin staring him in the face. Then suddenly, like magic, all his problems disappeared. Mortgage paid in full, lien satisfied, credit clean as a preacher's conscience. The payment came from something called Texas Property Solutions, which took me exactly 15 minutes to trace back to Vivian's law firm. She'd bought herself a building inspector for the cost of one family's medical bankruptcy. But the real surprise came when I looked up the construction superintendent barking orders at the work crew. Rick Blackthorne. And that last name wasn't a coincidence. Marriage records showed he was Vivian's brother-in-law, which meant this whole competitive bidding process was just family dinner conversation. The corruption ran so deep it had its own zip code. I called Sarah Denver, the property attorney who'd helped my neighbor fight off an easement grab last year. She had the reputation of a honey badger when it came to land theft, and the vocabulary of a Marine drill sergeant when somebody tried to screw over working folks. "Jesus Christ, Garrett," she said after reviewing my evidence. "This isn't property dispute. This is a RICO case waiting to happen. Federal charges, the whole 9 yards." That afternoon, Sarah filed an emergency cease and desist order with enough legal firepower to stop a tank battalion. By law, all construction should have halted immediately pending resolution. Should have. The court papers got delivered at 3 p.m. sharp. By 3:15, I watched Rick Blackthorne read them, laugh like a hyena, then wad them up and stuff them in his toolbox next to his leftover sandwich. "That's a federal court order," I told him, standing at my fence line with rage building like pressure in a boiler. "That's real nice, Grandpa. I got county permits that say I can build whatever I want here. Take your fancy lawyer papers and shove them where the sun don't shine." Neat. The taste of combat adrenaline flooded my mouth, metallic and electric, the same flavor I'd experienced in Afghanistan when insurgents thought they were untouchable. But this wasn't a war zone. This was Texas, where the law actually meant something when you knew how to weaponize it properly. That night, I turned my property into a surveillance operation that would make the CIA proud. Trail cameras with night vision capabilities, motion sensors, wireless feeds streaming directly to my laptop. If they wanted to continue their illegal construction, I'd document every shovelful of dirt for the federal prosecutors. I also made some calls to Austin. Turns out the wetlands where they were building required special environmental permits that took months to obtain. Permits Vivian definitely didn't have, because the state environmental agency had never heard of her project. Destroying protected wetlands carried fines of $50,000 per day, plus criminal charges for the responsible parties. By midnight, I had enough evidence to turn Vivian's suburban kingdom into a federal crime scene. The sound of night insects mixed with distant machinery as I organized documentation that would end her career and bankrupt her operation. But tomorrow would bring the real war. Because Vivian Blackthorne was about to discover what happened when you picked a fight with someone who'd made a career out of dismantling criminal networks. Vivian's desperation reached new lows when she decided to destroy my life along with my land. I woke up to red and blue lights flashing outside my bedroom window. 3 sheriff's cruisers, 2 deputies with hands on their weapons, and a warrant for my arrest based on credible reports of terroristic threats against community leaders. According to the sworn complaint filed by Vivian Blackthorne, I'd called her at 2 a.m. threatening to blow up the clubhouse and everyone in it using my military explosives training. She had phone records, witness statements, and a recording of what sounded like my voice making detailed threats. Complete fabrication, but convincing enough to get me handcuffed in my own driveway while neighbors filmed with their phones. "Mr. Westbrook," Deputy Collins said, looking genuinely apologetic, "we have to take you in. Domestic terrorism threats are federal now." The metal handcuffs bit into my wrists as they loaded me into the patrol car. The taste of injustice flooded my mouth, bitter as burnt coffee, sharp as broken glass. Through the window, I could see construction crews already back at work, taking advantage of my arrest to pour concrete for what looked like tennis courts. 12 hours in county lockup gave me plenty of time to think. The cell smelled like disinfectant and despair, echoing with the conversations of men whose lives had been derailed by circumstances beyond their control. But this wasn't circumstance, this was warfare, and I'd just been outflanked by an enemy willing to manufacture evidence. Sarah Denver bailed me out with paperwork that revealed the depth of Vivian's corruption. The witness who claimed to overhear my threats, a recently hired security guard at Willowbrook whose background check showed 3 assault convictions and a history of perjury for hire. The phone recording that supposedly captured my voice? Audio analysis would later prove it was assembled from voice clips lifted from my YouTube videos about woodworking techniques digitally manipulated to create threatening statements I'd never made. "Garrett," Sarah said as we walked out of the courthouse, "this woman isn't just stealing your land, she's trying to destroy your entire existence." But here's what Vivian didn't understand about targeting a combat engineer. We're trained to stay calm under fire and think 3 moves ahead of the enemy. That afternoon, while she was celebrating her tactical victory, I was at the FBI field office in Austin talking to Agent Rebecca Torres about organized fraud with interstate implications. Turns out falsifying federal terroristic threat reports carries 20 years in federal prison, and the Bureau takes a dim view of civilians using fabricated evidence to weaponize law enforcement. Agent Torres was particularly interested in the voice manipulation technology, which suggested resources beyond simple local corruption. "Mr. Westbrook, this operation has sophistication that indicates either organized crime involvement or significant financial backing, possibly both." While the FBI opened their investigation, I made a phone call that would change everything. My old Army buddy Jake Morrison, no relation to the corrupt building inspector, worked private security for a tech company in Dallas. He specialized in digital forensics, the kind of high-tech detective work that could trace manipulated audio back to its source. "Jesus, Garrett," Jake said after analyzing the recording, "whoever did this used professional-grade software that costs more than most people's houses. This isn't amateur hour. Somebody paid serious money to frame you." The software license traced back to a Houston company called Digital Media Solutions, which had invoiced $15,000 to Blackthorne Consulting for audio production services the day before my arrest. Vivian had literally bought a felony charge against me. But the most beautiful discovery came when Jake dug deeper into the metadata. The manipulated audio file contained digital fingerprints showing it was created on a computer registered to Kellerman, Price & Associates, the same law firm representing Vivian in court. Not only had they manufactured evidence, they'd been sloppy enough to leave digital breadcrumbs leading back to their own office. That evening, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the honest smell of wood shavings and the distant hum of illegal construction, organizing documentation that would destroy everyone involved in this conspiracy. The sound of my planer smoothing rough cedar echoed like a promise. When I was finished with them, their lives would be as perfectly leveled as the boards on my workbench. 20 years of dismantling insurgent networks had taught me that the bigger the conspiracy, the more vulnerabilities it creates. Vivian's operation now included federal crimes, digital evidence trails, and enough co-conspirators to fill a courtroom. She'd escalated from simple property theft to federal fraud, and in doing so, she'd given me the weapons to destroy not just her land grab, but her entire criminal enterprise. The next morning would bring the real war, because while she'd been busy framing me for terrorism, I'd been building a federal case that would turn her suburban kingdom into a federal crime scene. Game over, Vivian. Time to show you what real demolition expertise looked like. The truth hit me like a freight train loaded with dynamite. I'd been digging through Vivian's corporate filings at 2 a.m., fueled by black coffee and pure rage, when something made my combat-trained instincts scream that I was missing the forest for the trees. The Willowbrook HOA paperwork looked legitimate. Official seals, legal jargon, the works. But 20 years of reading enemy intelligence had taught me that the biggest lies always hide in the most boring documents. Something about those incorporation papers felt wrong, like a perfectly forged passport with one tiny detail out of place. I called the Texas Secretary of State's office the next morning, hands trembling as I dialed. "Sir, I need you to verify the legal status of Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." 5 minutes on hold felt like 5 hours. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it echo in my empty workshop. "Sir, I show a filing attempt from 2021, but the incorporation was rejected." The world stopped spinning. Rejected? Missing signatures, improper notarization, no registered agent. We sent correction instructions, but they never resubmitted. The entity was never legally incorporated. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and crashed onto my workbench, scattering wood shavings like shrapnel. For 3 years, 200 families had been paying dues to an organization that existed only in Vivian's imagination. Every rule, every fee, every threat, all of it built on a lie so massive it took my breath away, but the real horror show was waiting in the financial records at the courthouse. Sitting in that musty records room, surrounded by the smell of old paper and institutional coffee, I traced $2.3 million in special assessments that residents had paid for community amenities, money that had vanished into a web of shell companies like water into sand. Willowbrook Management, LLC, Blackthorn Property Services, Texas Community Solutions. Different names, same owner, millions of stolen dollars flowing into Vivian's personal accounts while families struggled to pay inflated HOA fees for amenities they thought would benefit their community. The taste of pure betrayal filled my mouth, bitter as poison, sharp as broken promises. But the masterstroke of her con was buried in bank loan applications that made my hands shake with fury. Vivian had convinced 3 different banks to finance construction based on projected property values after completion of luxury amenities. She was building a $2.3 million clubhouse with borrowed money, using inflated assessments of property she didn't own, planning to pocket the difference between construction costs and loan amounts when the fake HOA inevitably collapsed. The residents weren't just victims. They were unwitting accomplices, their own money financing the very fraud that would eventually bankrupt them when the loans came due, and there was no legal entity to pay them back. 200 families, kids who thought they'd have a pool to swim in, parents who'd sacrificed for tennis courts their children would never use, elderly couples who'd moved here thinking they were joining a legitimate community, all of them betrayed by a woman who'd turned their dreams into her personal ATM machine. The illegal HOA meant every construction permit was void. Every bank loan was based on fraudulent documentation. Every brick laid on my property belonged to me by default, since no legal entity had authority to build there. I didn't just own my land. I owned their entire $2.3 million clubhouse, built with stolen money on property they had no right to use. Vivian had spent 3 years constructing the evidence of her own destruction, one fraudulent transaction at a time. Sitting in that records room, surrounded by proof of the biggest con job in county history, I finally understood the scope of my power. This wasn't just about getting my land back. This was about exposing a criminal conspiracy that had robbed an entire community blind. Time to turn Vivian's suburban paradise into a federal crime scene. The war room I built in my workshop smelled like sawdust, black coffee, and approaching justice. I'd turned my great-grandfather's workbench into Mission Command Central, laptops displaying financial records, trail cameras streaming live footage of illegal construction, cell phones connecting me to federal agents who were salivating over the evidence I'd handed them. Agent Rebecca Torres called me at 6 a.m. with news that made my pulse spike like I'd touched a live wire. "Garrett, we've got warrants approved for wire fraud, bank fraud, and RICO conspiracy. 3 weeks to coordinate with local authorities, then we move. But here's the beautiful part. We want to time the arrests for maximum impact." The FBI loved cases where corruption got exposed in front of news cameras. Public officials committing crimes deserved public humiliation, and Vivian's operation had enough co-conspirators to stage a perp walk that would make the evening news across Texas. What kind of timing are we talking about? Does Willowbrook have any community events planned? HOA meetings? Grand openings? I almost laughed out loud. Actually, yes. Vivian's planning a ribbon-cutting ceremony for her illegal clubhouse next month. Invited the whole county plus local media. Perfect. Nothing says justice served like federal agents crashing a party built on stolen money. While the FBI coordinated their takedown, I assembled my own strike team with the precision of a military operation. Sarah Denver brought in Marcus Webb, a forensic accountant who could trace money through shell companies like a bloodhound following a scent. Webb had exposed financial fraud for 3 federal prosecutors, and his quiet intensity reminded me of the best intelligence analysts I'd worked with overseas. "Garrett," he said, studying bank records spread across my kitchen table, "Vivian's moved $2.3 million through 6 shell companies, but she made one critical mistake. Every electronic transfer creates a digital fingerprint that points back to the source." Webb showed me how to read financial crime like a roadmap, routing numbers that revealed geographic locations, timestamps that established criminal conspiracy, account names that connected seemingly separate transactions. Modern banking made money laundering easier, but it also created evidence trails that were impossible to erase. The takeaway hit me like revelation. Criminals always think they're smarter than the system, but technology never forgets where money comes from or where it goes. My next recruit came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Martinez, the VA psychiatrist who'd helped me process Sarah's death, had connections throughout the Veterans Advocacy Network. When I explained Vivian's attempts to frame me as unstable, her professional calm shifted into controlled fury. "Using veterans' service records to manufacture psychiatric profiles is federal crime under the Veterans Protection Act," she said, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "She's not just attacking your property, she's weaponizing your military service." Dr. Martinez connected me with 3 other veterans who'd faced similar character assassination from corrupt officials. The pattern was clear. When powerful people wanted to discredit inconvenient witnesses, they attacked military service as evidence of mental instability. But my most dangerous ally was Jake Morrison, my old Army buddy whose digital forensics skills had already exposed Vivian's audio manipulation. Jake agreed to conduct full cyber surveillance of her operation, mapping every digital connection in her criminal network. "These suburban criminals think they're sophisticated because they hired expensive lawyers," Jake said, installing monitoring equipment that would make the NSA jealous. "But they always create more evidence trying to cover their tracks than they would have left committing the original crimes." Jake's plan was beautiful in its simplicity. Document every moment of illegal construction while simultaneously mapping the digital infrastructure of Vivian's corruption. High-definition cameras, encrypted data storage, court-admissible evidence gathering that would survive any legal challenge. The physical trap was taking shape like a precision-guided missile. I'd let them complete their illegal clubhouse, allowing Vivian to invest maximum money and effort into facilities built on property she didn't own. Every marble tile installed, every crystal chandelier mounted, every dollar spent increased the value of improvements that would belong to me when the fraud was exposed. Meanwhile, the FBI would coordinate arrests during Vivian's grand opening celebration, ensuring maximum public exposure when her suburban kingdom collapsed in federal handcuffs. The taste of approaching victory filled my mouth, metallic and electric like the moment before lightning strikes a target. That night, sitting in my workshop surrounded by surveillance equipment and legal documents, I listened to the distant hum of construction machinery building the evidence of Vivian's own destruction. The smell of cedar shavings mixed with the satisfaction of a plan falling into place with military precision. She'd built her empire on stolen money, fraudulent documents, and the arrogant assumption that small-town corruption was too complex for one combat engineer to unravel. Time to teach her what real demolition expertise looked like. Desperation turned Vivian into a monster, and she was about to prove there was no line she wouldn't cross. The character assassination campaign started with my neighbors. I woke up to find flyers stuffed in every mailbox within a mile radius, complete with my military photo and headlines that made my stomach turn. Unstable veteran threatens community, and PTSD sufferer stockpiles weapons. The text described me as a dangerous loner who'd been making terrorist threats against families and children. The flyers included my home address, my workshop schedule, and a warning to report any suspicious activity to local law enforcement. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor of 15 years, crossed the street when she saw me checking my mail. The Rodriguez family, whose kids I'd taught to build birdhouses, suddenly had their curtains drawn whenever I walked past. The smell of paranoia and manufactured fear hung in the air like smoke from a chemical fire. But the real cruelty came when they targeted Sarah's memory. Someone had posted fake reviews on every website where my custom furniture was mentioned, claiming I was exploiting my dead wife's memory for profit and using veteran sympathy to scam customers. They'd created fake social media accounts posting doctored photos of Sarah with captions suggesting our marriage was abusive. The taste of pure rage flooded my mouth, metallic and electric, like biting down on a live wire. When I tried to report the fake accounts, I discovered something that made my hands shake with fury. The harassment complaints had been filed preemptively against me. Vivian's lawyers had submitted sworn affidavits claiming I was using fake accounts to harass her, providing evidence that I'd created the very profiles that were destroying my reputation. The system was rigged so thoroughly that I couldn't defend myself without appearing to confirm their lies. But Vivian's masterpiece of manipulation was still coming. That afternoon, Child Protective Services showed up at my door with a caseworker who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Mr. Westbrook, we've received reports that you've been inappropriate with neighborhood children. Multiple families have filed complaints about you approaching kids near your workshop. My workshop, where I'd been teaching woodworking to local kids for 3 years with their parents' enthusiastic permission. Those are voluntary lessons. The parents drop them off and pick them up. Sir, we have witness statements saying you've been offering candy to lure children onto your property without parental supervision. The witness statements came with time-stamped photos showing kids in my workshop, photos taken by parents who'd been grateful for the free lessons until someone convinced them I was a predator. The images were presented without context, making innocent educational activities look sinister and calculated. 20 years of honorable military service, a lifetime of helping my community, and now I was being painted as a danger to children because I'd taught kids how to use hand tools safely. The taste of injustice was so bitter it made me physically sick. But here's where Vivian made her fatal mistake. One of the concerned parents who'd filed complaints was Janet Blackthorne, Vivian's sister-in-law, who'd never had children and hadn't lived in Texas until 3 weeks ago. Jake Morrison discovered she'd been flown in from Oregon specifically to create false testimony, with hotel receipts and plane tickets paid for by Blackthorne Consulting Services. The mini-twist was beautiful in its stupidity. Vivian had created a paper trail proving she'd transported witnesses across state lines to file false police reports, federal charges for conspiracy, perjury, and witness tampering, all documented with receipts showing she'd paid for her own family members to destroy my reputation. Jake also uncovered the digital smoking gun, emails between Vivian and a private investigation firm specializing in reputation management through strategic information campaigns. She'd paid $50,000 for a professional character assassination package that included fake social media accounts, fabricated witness testimony, and coordinated harassment designed to discredit targets of civil litigation. Garrett, Jake said, showing me email records that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. She literally bought a conspiracy to destroy your life, and she was dumb enough to put it all in writing. Every flyer, every fake review, every manufactured complaint was connected to financial transactions traceable directly to Vivian's accounts. She'd created a criminal enterprise dedicated solely to destroying my credibility, and she documented every step of the process like she was writing a confession. The harder she fought to escape consequences, the more evidence she created for federal prosecutors. That night, sitting in my workshop surrounded by children's woodworking projects and the lingering scent of innocence destroyed by greed, I organized documentation that would turn her character assassination campaign into additional felony charges. Vivian Blackthorne had crossed the line from property fraud into attacking everything I held sacred: my military service, my marriage, my relationship with my community's children. She'd just declared war on my entire existence. Time to finish this fight permanently. Vivian's final gambit was so audacious it took my breath away, and so stupid it guaranteed her destruction. With federal agents breathing down her neck and her character assassination failing, she decided to go nuclear. If she couldn't discredit me or steal my land legally, she'd manufacture a crisis so spectacular that it would justify everything she'd done. The setup was diabolical in its simplicity. Jake Morrison's digital surveillance caught the first hint of what was coming: encrypted communications between Vivian's law firm and a security consulting company based in Houston. The company specialized in threat assessment and crisis management, corporate speak for manufacturing emergencies that justified extreme responses. "Garrett," Jake said, his voice tight with urgency, "they're planning something for the grand opening. The communications mentioned controlled disruption and documented security threats that will require law enforcement intervention." The grand opening was 3 days away. Vivian had invited 200 community members, 3 county commissioners, the local state representative, and news crews from Austin and Houston. Maximum public exposure for her crowning achievement, a $2.3 million clubhouse built with stolen money on my property. But she wasn't planning a celebration, she was planning a setup. The next morning brought confirmation of her scheme in the form of Jerry Walsh, a private investigator whose business card described him as a security specialist, but whose criminal record revealed him as a professional agitator who'd been arrested in 4 states for inciting violence at public events. Walsh approached me at the hardware store with a proposition that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Westbrook, I represent concerned citizens who think you're getting screwed by that HOA situation. We'd like to help you make a statement at their fancy party." He described a plan to peacefully protest the grand opening with signs and chants that would really get their attention. But the signs he wanted to carry contained threats against specific individuals, and the chants he suggested included language that any reasonable person would interpret as incitement to violence. "We'll make sure you get credit for standing up to these corrupt bastards," Walsh said, his smile as fake as a $3 bill. The taste of pure recognition flooded my mouth. This was a trap designed to make me look like the dangerous veteran Vivian had been portraying. Walsh would provoke an incident, news cameras would capture me appearing to threaten violence, and Vivian would be justified in calling for my arrest and immediate removal from my property. But here's what she didn't know. Jake's surveillance had been recording Walsh for weeks. We had footage of him meeting with Vivian's lawyers, audio recordings of him discussing payment for services rendered, and financial records showing transfers from Blackthorne Consulting to his security company. Walsh wasn't a concerned citizen. He was a paid actor hired to destroy me. The mini twist came when Jake discovered the full scope of Vivian's plan through leaked emails from her law firm. She wasn't just trying to provoke me into a public confrontation. She was planning to stage a complete security incident that would justify calling in federal authorities, declaring my property a crime scene, and seizing it under emergency powers while the investigation proceeded. Her timeline was precise. Walsh would provoke an incident at the grand opening. News cameras would capture violent threats against community leaders. Federal authorities would be called to investigate domestic terrorism, and my property would be seized as evidence pending resolution of the security threat. By the time the fabricated charges were dismissed, months or years later, her stolen clubhouse would be fait accompli, too expensive to demolish and too integrated into the community to remove. She was planning to steal my land using federal anti-terrorism laws, but Vivian had made one crucial error. She'd underestimated the intelligence network I'd built over 20 years in the Army. Jake Morrison wasn't just monitoring her communications. He was feeding information to Agent Torres, who was coordinating with federal prosecutors to turn Vivian's own plan against her. "Garrett," Agent Torres called me that evening, "we know about the setup they're planning. We're going to let them proceed, but with federal agents recording everything. When they try to manufacture evidence against you, we'll have them on tape committing federal crimes in real time." The FBI would document Vivian's attempt to stage domestic terrorism charges, creating ironclad evidence of conspiracy, witness tampering, and false reporting that would add decades to her prison sentence. Instead of destroying me, her grand finale would provide the final evidence needed to destroy her entire criminal enterprise. The sound of construction equipment working late into the night drifted across my property like a funeral dirge for Vivian's suburban empire. She was putting finishing touches on a clubhouse that would become the centerpiece of her federal prosecution. That night, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the tools my great-grandfather had used to build an honest life, organizing surveillance equipment that would document the systematic destruction of dishonest one. In 3 days, Vivian Blackthorne would discover what happened when someone tried to use federal anti-terrorism laws against a combat veteran who'd spent 20 years fighting actual terrorists. Her suburban war was about to become a federal crime scene. The morning of Vivian's grand opening dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for watching an empire collapse in real time. By 9 a.m., the illegal clubhouse was buzzing with activity. White tents covered catering tables loaded with champagne and caviar. A red carpet led from the parking lot to marble steps that gleamed in the Texas sun. Television crews from 3 stations set up cameras while county commissioners glad-handed voters, and Vivian held court in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. 200 residents, politicians, and media representatives gathered to celebrate what they thought was a community achievement. What they were actually witnessing was the final act of the largest fraud case in county history. I watched from my property line, wearing my dress uniform for the first time since Sarah's funeral, medals gleaming on my chest like armor against the lies Vivian had spread about my service. Agent Torres stood beside me in her FBI windbreaker, radio crackling with communications from the dozen federal agents positioned throughout the crowd. "Remember, Garrett," she said, "let them make the first move. We need them on record attempting to manufacture evidence." At 10:30, Jerry Walsh materialized next to me like a bad rash, carrying signs with threatening language designed to make me look like a domestic terrorist. "Time to make your statement, old man," he said, thrusting a sign reading "Death to HOA tyrants" into my hands. "Show these corrupt bastards what a real American looks like." "No thanks," I replied, loud enough for the FBI microphones to pick up clearly. Walsh's face twisted with frustration. His entire paycheck depended on getting me to appear threatening on camera, and I wasn't cooperating with the script Vivian had written. "What kind of veteran are you? These people stole your land and you're just going to stand there like a coward?" The FBI loved it when criminals created their own evidence. Walsh was being recorded attempting to incite violence while federal agents documented every word for court presentation. At 11 a.m. sharp, Vivian took the microphone for her victory speech. Her voice carried across the crowd with the confidence of someone who thought she'd already won. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the crown jewel of Willowbrook Estates. This magnificent community wellness center represents our commitment to excellence, our dedication to family values, and our vision for the future." The crowd applauded politely while I savored the irony. She was celebrating a $2.3 million monument to fraud built on stolen land with money embezzled from the very people cheering her speech. "Now," she continued, "I'd like to address some recent rumors spread by certain individuals who oppose progress and community development." This was my cue. I stepped forward, documents in hand, and walked toward the microphone with the measured pace of a man who'd spent 20 years advancing under fire. "Mrs. Blackthorne," I called out, voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent crowd, "I have some questions about the legal authority for this construction project." The television cameras swiveled toward me like weapons tracking a target. Vivian's face went white as fresh snow, but her smile never wavered. "Oh, Mr. Westbrook, how nice that you decided to join our celebration instead of lurking on your property making threats." "I'm not making threats, ma'am. I'm serving legal documents." I handed her the federal court papers while news cameras recorded every moment. "You're hereby notified that this entire facility has been constructed on private property without legal authority, using funds embezzled from Willowbrook residents through a fraudulent homeowners association that was never legally incorporated." The crowd's murmur rose like wind through wheat fields. Vivian tried to maintain her composure, but sweat was beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. "That's ridiculous. We have all the proper permits, and those permits were obtained by bribing county officials with money stolen from the very residents standing here today." Agent Torres stepped forward, FBI credentials gleaming in the sunlight. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Agent Rebecca Torres, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mrs. Blackthorne, you're under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed across the sudden silence like gunshots. Camera flashes exploded like artillery fire as federal agents moved through the crowd, arresting Dale Morrison, Rick Blackthorne, and Jerry Walsh in coordinated precision that would have made my old Army unit proud. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking the microphone as Vivian was led away in federal custody, "this clubhouse was built entirely on my private property using $2.3 million stolen from your HOA dues. Every brick, every tile, every fixture legally belongs to me." I pulled out a deed that proved 47 acres of Westbrook family land, including the ground where 200 people were currently standing. I'm prepared to sell this facility back to the community for fair market value, $4.7 million, with proceeds donated to a veterans' mental health program and a fund to reimburse defrauded residents. The taste of justice was sweeter than anything served at Vivian's catered buffet. The mic drop moment had arrived. "Oh, and Mrs. Blackthorne, welcome to federal prison. I hope they have tennis courts." 6 months later, I was sitting in the same federal courthouse where Vivian had tried to destroy my life, watching her receive a sentence that would ensure she never stole from anyone again. "Mrs. Vivian Blackthorne," Judge Patricia Hernandez said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you are hereby sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, and ordered to pay $7 million in restitution to your victims." The woman who'd once threatened me from the driver's seat of a white Mercedes now wore orange jumpsuit and shackles, her perfectly manicured facade replaced by the hollow stare of someone who'd lost everything. Her co-conspirators, Dale Morrison, Rick Blackthorne, Jerry Walsh, received sentences ranging from 6 months to 2 years, their careers destroyed along with their criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors had built their case on the mountain of evidence Vivian herself had created. Every fraudulent document, every bribe payment, every fake witness statement had been preserved in digital format, creating an unbreakable chain of proof that led directly to federal conviction. The residents of Willowbrook Estates recovered every penny of their stolen HOA dues through a class action lawsuit that Sarah Denver prosecuted with the intensity of a guided missile. 200 families got their money back, plus punitive damages that compensated them for 3 years of living under fraudulent authority. But the real victory was what happened to the land itself. I donated 30 acres to Millfield County for the Sarah Westbrook Memorial Conservation Center, where local schools bring children to learn about environmental stewardship and Texas wildlife. The old clubhouse became an education center where kids discover the difference between honest work and criminal shortcuts. The remaining 17 acres became home to the Veterans Workshop program, where combat veterans learn woodworking skills that help them transition to civilian life while processing the invisible wounds of military service. The smell of cedar shavings and the sound of honest tools have replaced the diesel exhaust and corruption that once poisoned my family's land. Every month, a dozen veterans gather in my great-grandfather's workshop to build furniture, share stories, and remember that honor still matters in a world that sometimes forgets its value. Dr. Martinez volunteers her time providing counseling services, ensuring that no veteran faces their struggles alone. The program has helped 43 veterans find meaningful work, stable housing, and hope for futures they'd almost given up believing were possible. 3 have started their own woodworking businesses. 2 have reconciled with families they thought they'd lost forever. 1 wrote me a letter saying the program saved his life when he was planning to end it. That letter hangs framed in my workshop, next to Sarah's photo and my great-grandfather's original homestead deed. The legal precedent from Vivian's case led to Texas passing the Westbrook Act, requiring annual verification of HOA legal status and criminal background checks for all board members. County clerks now maintain online databases where residents can verify their association's incorporation status with a simple search. Real estate agents must disclose HOA legal status before home sales, and banks are required to verify association authority before approving construction loans on community property. The law has prevented dozens of similar fraud schemes across Texas, saving millions of dollars and protecting property rights for working families. Last month I remarried. Dr. Patricia Martinez and I exchanged vows under the same live oaks where my great-grandfather built his first house. The wedding reception was held in the Conservation Center, surrounded by families whose children learn about nature where Vivian once planned to build her empire of lies. Jake Morrison was my best man. Agent Torres brought her family for the celebration. Sarah Denver gave the toast that made everyone cry with laughter and joy. Even Martha from the county clerk's office attended, armed with stories about property disputes that made our victory seem even sweeter. The taste of happiness, I discovered, is remarkably similar to the taste of justice. Both carry the flavor of truth finally revealed and honor finally restored. As the sun sets each evening over land that's been in my family for 80 years, I sit on my porch listening to the sounds of honest work from the Veterans Workshop, the laughter of children learning about conservation, and the peaceful quiet of a community healed from the wounds of corruption. Vivian Blackthorne thought she could steal my land and destroy my life. Instead, she gave me the opportunity to build something better than either of us had imagined.